So I was just thinking, when we were talking about how cheap these erasers are, the only cheaper or maybe as cheap would be bread, which was incidentally used for erasing
I mean,
pencil marks earlier.
strangely enough, I think the places have flipped when erasers first came to be. Bread would have been the cheaper option, but today probably bread costs more than the 1 rupee that this thing costs. Welcome to Stationery Test Drive with Inky Memo. Today we are going to be talking about the Nataraj 621 Plasto Eraser. I am Samir,
I'm Vishal.
I'm Minjal.
and before we get to this, Vishal, what have you been up to?
I've been digitally painting some portraits for the better part of 2 or 3 years, and I'm nearly at the end. And I'll show you an update of what I've done on screen right now.
And Minjal and me have been working on updating the Inky Memo website. We've had it running for a year now, but we are going to be changing the layout of it. We're going to be adding our merchandise shop to it soon, and also some games which Minjal mentioned the last time. So a lot coming up. Stay tuned. So right now, what we are here to discuss today is the Nataraj 621 Plasto Eraser. Now this is a very simple, very inexpensive little eraser manufactured by the Hindustan Pencil Company in India. And what can I say? It's one of my favorite erasers. Vishal,
Yeah.
what do you have to say about
Yes,
this?
plus two. This eraser is
Yeah, I mean,
fantastic.
just for reference sake, this is how you get it in the box. These are the ones that we use on a daily basis.
Yeah, those are mine.
This is like the closest, and that's purely because this one was a new-ish. I literally I keep these all around the house. There's one in every room, pretty much. Wherever I'm sitting down, I end up with one of these erasers, and I think the thing that the cheeky little thing that we should maybe just point out at the beginning is that Hindustan pencils, as much as we love them and as much as we're going to feature a lot of their stuff, they have a couple of brands, and from what I understand, Nataraj is the more economical, sort of price conscious brand.
Yes,
But the Nataraj eraser is the best one they make.
definitely. Of all the ones I have tried, including their
The Apsara.
the Apsara brand, which
Right,
is the premium brand.
which we will feature very soon
And
because
we
we
have-
really like some of their stuff.
Yeah, but as far as the erasers are concerned, this is the best one.
And I remember telling this to someone in Hindustan Pencils, and I don't know if they were just bemused or horrified or tried to swat me away as a crazy person, but it's true. This is just a nice, simple eraser, which is it's very cheap, right? This box is
20 rupees for 20 pieces.
which is
What do
I-
you
I-
get?
30 or 40
25
cents.
cents for the entire box.
Of now we've used 6 of them, and we had maybe a couple more before when we used to get them just individually with a box of it. They usually come for free with a box of pencils, and I know like we use the Apsara pencil a lot, and we'll do an episode on that. That comes with an Apsara eraser, which is big and chunky and beautiful, and and it's not as good. So I mean, first of all, erasers are not like pencils or pens. They're not for putting down a mark. They're for erasing marks, but they are in some ways made. And let's show you the Apsara, which just drags along and does not
and
leave a
leaves
clean.
that grey.
Yeah, we'll punch in on that, and look, I'll just go through it with the Nataraj, and it's better already. Uh, other than making your house a mess with all these little bits and bots, we love these. We've loved using them. So, Menjal, why don't you show us what you've made with an eraser in this fashion that we put down pencil or pen work and then erased our way to glory. And that is glorious. That is a beautiful, precise, sharp pattern. You are a calligrapher, so, and it shows through beautifully in there. Can you tell us how you did it, or is there some?
So Samir and I, he gave me the idea of actually laying down, a background with a pencil, and then just erasing the patterns out.
Similar to what we did here.
Yes.
So you use the flat of a pencil.
Yes.
And put that down. And which eraser did you end up using? You used.
Oh, I tried the Apsara eraser. I tried the Apsara matte magic. I tried the Muji eraser, and then I decided to really dump all these. And what really worked was the Nataraj eraser. You really get the cleanest, erasers, if that is a word, with.
Let's have a look at this wonderful matte magic thing, which
is
good on this paper, but it does drag a fair bit. The good thing about this one is that it glides, and that's not always necessarily good when you want to bulk erase a thing that's a mistake. But it's great when you want to just carve out something, and this is barely any pressure at all. And because it's so cheap, you can cut them any way you want, right? Samir, you've done that, and Minjal, you've done that.
I did that, yeah. I cut the edge with a cutter.
A craft knife.
With a craft knife.
Okay.
Which we should actually maybe review.
And Samir has done more of a wedge, so he can actually show us the two pieces.
I actually had this piece which I've been using for a year or something. So I just continued using that. I didn't pick up a new piece to do this experiment with. And I just, again, cut a little wedge out using a craft knife, and that's what I used for the detailed work, and that's what I used for the bigger work.
Okay, so these are a little hard to hold, and at some point, we'll get to an eraser with a holder made for this precision work. But as a pure, like 25 cents or 20 rupees for a box of that versus, you can afford to experiment, is what we're saying. You can afford to buy a box of these. They're available at most stationery stores in India. I believe they're available in the US as well under a different brand.
Very likely. I think they might be available under the Casemate brand, which is Walmart's kind of in-house stationery brand. And I know that a lot of the pencils and the erasers that are under the Casemate brand are actually manufactured by Hindustan Pencils.
Okay, so if you're in the US, please let us know if you've used Casemate and what your experience with them has been. Samir, show us your work done with the eraser, which is a bit more elaborate, but along the same lines, I believe.
Mostly done with this little piece here.
Okay.
That's what I came up with.
That is brilliant. And yes, I think you would have to have that for such a fine wedge of
and that's why I made something that was this difficult to hold, because at this size you're just kind of drawing with your fingers rather than having to move the eraser around. So
it's a bit more primal almost. And mine is probably the least easy to tell that any eraser went into it, but it honestly would not have been possible without an eraser, I think. It is a landscape. I'm not good at landscapes. I've never really tried. But
those clouds,
yes, and
just would not work.
And those clouds were gouged out like that, and then I went in and filled in a bit of pencil here and there. There's I don't know if we'll show it in a close up. There's a very thin line of erased white to make this stand out from the sky, which is actually it's an illustrator's trick, but it's also something that sort of happens optically anyway with contrasting things. It's a function of how light is processed by your brain and your eyes. And you can't do that by, for instance, drawing up to here, even if you're a very precise person, and stopping on that line. These edges were done with keeping a metallic ruler like this against the thing and then erasing past it again. Because this is nice and soft, you can just like press it into the edge really nicely. I can show you that on a piece of paper here, where you can really go in and get just the finest edge there. that you can't get. Uh, so if you have a set of French curves, then you can do curved lines like this with really sharp edges, and I think we should try that next time if I ever find where my French curves are. Uh, get French curves; they're really great. Every illustrator should have them. Every illustrator should just even clumsily learn how to use them, and that's an endorsement that we will make good on at some point.
It does take some practice to actually figure out how to apply them to the curves that you're drawing.
Yeah, you can muddle through, and I muddle through, but yes, you can use them with erasers, you can use them with pencils, but erasers are what we're talking about.
So I was just thinking, when we were talking about how cheap these erasers are, the only cheaper or maybe as cheap would be bread, which was incidentally used for erasing
I mean,
pencil marks earlier.
strangely enough, I think the places have flipped when erasers first came to be. Bread would have been the cheaper option, but today probably bread costs more than the ₹1 that this thing costs.
Yes, that's true.
Speaking of bread does go stale over time. Some breads go hard like baguettes, but some go soft and mushy. I'm just noticing that there was this Nataraj plaster that I fished out from a drawer the other day, which I hadn't used for a while, and it's a bit harder than when you get. It sort of starts out a certain hardness, and then as you use them, I'm guessing your own natural oils and kind of moisture gets into this, and it makes it. It's not quite a kneaded eraser, which we'll cover at some point as well.
Yeah.
Which is the preferred tool by artists because it can be molded and made to have those nice like soft erasers. But I think having one and using one in your hands is paramount to its long term. It gets better over time, is what I want to say.
Yeah.
Don't give up on it when it looks like this. Don't try to rub it out completely. We have the tendency, especially in school, that a teacher would come by and see a mark like that on your eraser and say, "Oh, you need to clean that off." And no, that you don't actually need to clean that off.
Vishal and me, as always, come at this from an illustration point of view, and illustrators use erasers a lot. What about calligraphers? I know that you do a lot of erasing of pencil lines that are guidelines and things, but what was it like to use an eraser as the actual instrument?
So I've actually very recently ordered the Tombow mechanical eraser, which I use.
It kind of
It's
looks
this.
like a mechanical pencil, but there's a little end with
Eraser
an
tip.
eraser.
There's an eraser.
So
tip.
it kind of ends up looking like that, right? But
Exactly.
even thinner.
Yeah. Now, for my mostly erasing, grids and guidelines, I use those kind of erasers. I sometimes use these Muji erasers. Now, this was a different experience because my medium for drawing actually was not the pen, not the pencil, but the eraser. Which is why I actually used a cutter to shave off the edge, so I could get again a broad edge, and that is exactly how I managed to get these kind of figures.
Okay. And did you was it something that you had to keep sharpening like you would a pencil or a?
Did you do it multiple passes? Or?
Because we worked on things which didn't require precision. We needed sharp edges, but we didn't need it to be exact.
I had to, yes. I had to actually shave off a couple of layers of the rubber to keep getting the sharp edges.
So the typical way that we have artists, at least like us, have learned to use an eraser is that it starts off this way. You kind of work your, like any tool, you kind of hold it in a specific set of ways to encourage several kinds of surface. You'll have curved surfaces like this, which allow you to wick away things. You'll have more sharper edges where you can press down in this kind of action. But you also end up developing these kind of curved points almost,
Wedges,
and these leading edges that allow you to do those lines and those curves. Now, there's no real science to this. Every artist kind of comes at it their own way, but it's something that I would encourage anyone who has an eraser to either try to work towards just unconsciously, or even like Minjal, like you did, get a get a craft knife and start making those wedges. You can start like Samir did. You can just like take off a piece, and Samir, show me yours, because like this is literally like an artist's signature. If I saw this, I would know that this is mine because of the way I hold it and the way I erase stuff with it. And that one is definitely Samir's. I know that.
Yeah, I generally have a much more kind of
Rounded
flat,
kind of,
rounded kind of way of doing this.
And I end
whereas
up
he
with
clearly
these.
has a more biased, hence the little angle there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, these do become
each thing becomes
very
an
personalized
artist's
over time.
signature almost, as much of a signature as the drawing itself. Erasers are wonderful and pencils are wonderful. Have we always had erasers, or were we always using bread before?
I think when the history of erasers as we now know them has to start with graphite, because before then the mediums were different. When we were using inks and pigments, there were all sorts of materials used to rub things out, including things like milk
Milk.
from parchment.
Okay.
So that people tried to come up with all sorts of natural materials that would remove ink or pigment from a surface. Including in some cases, in the days of parchment, they would literally just take a knife and scrape out the surface of it.
Right. And in the case of vellum or any of those almost like leather source things, you could literally scrape it off like a
Exactly.
skin.
So the idea of an eraser in the modern way started with graphite, which was somewhere in the 1500s we discovered graphite. And initially, the thing that people did use, as Minjal mentioned before, was the white part of wheat bread. Because it could be kind of, I guess
Like
you could
a
think of it
sponge.
like a kneaded eraser today.
Right.
So you could kind of knead it into a little pulp, and that would pick out not as well as what we have today, but it would pick out, let's say, most of the graphite off a piece of
The
paper.
paper stalks were, I guess, a lot hardier as well. So they
The
could take
paper
it.
stalks were hardier, and the graphite itself was more pure graphite and less clay. So
Right, so it's
therefore,
not
it was
as-
easier to
Not as
remove.
hard.
When rubber was imported into Europe from South America initially, it was quite an accidental discovery that pieces of raw rubber also acted like the bread. It was literally someone picking up a piece of rubber on the floor
In
instead
their
of the
workshop.
bread and finding that it worked almost as well.
Incidentally, this someone was the same person who discovered oxygen.
Huh.
So it was Joseph Priestley.
Wow.
He was a busy man.
Yes, he was.
A busy man in a busy time. I think in South America, rubber was most famous for being used in, at least to me as this kind of weird history buff, in the balls that were used in the game. Nobody quite knows what the name of the game is, because
was,
it was just called the game in
Yes.
the Aztec civilization.
Yes.
Or the Maya.
I think the Olmecs
The
were
Olmecs.
probably the ones who
Please, if you know more about South American history than we do, clearly we're Indians. This doesn't get covered in our classes. Please.
the Olmecs were the ones who probably developed a lot of the kind of the traditional technology around rubber, and then it was kind of accepted and developed further by the Aztecs as well.
and informally we call these rubber the same way that we call this lead, but this is actually rubber.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that the substance that we call rubber had a South American name to begin with.
Okay.
It didn't have an English name.
Okay.
The reason it's called rubber is because people started using it to rub out graphite.
Okay. So that's a wonderfully circuitous Mobius strip of a definition, I would say. But yeah, in the South American cultures, they used it extensively. They used it in the game. So rubber balls were used for sport, and metaphorically, and anecdotally, if you lost that game, you were rubbed out. So it's quite a sordid but also very useful history. It's wonderful how these things go from being venerated to benign. I think we have brought some degree of veneration back to it, to this humble 621 Nataraj Plasto Eraser.
And by the way, the story behind the 621 is that
Why the number?
Nataraj is a brand, of course, that's done by Hindustan Pencils, which started in 1958. And the Nataraj 621 pencil is the classic pencil that's made in India. Just like you have the Black Wings or...
I don't actually own a Nataraj 621 pencil right now, but they started doing these commemorative pens that have the same colored red and
so
black.
we'll put a picture into the video. The Nataraj 621 pencil is a very distinct black and red pencil, and pretty much 2 or 3 generations of Indians grew up using that as the standard pencil in school.
Yeah, I have a box of them from even 20 years ago, I think.
So the Nataraj 621 Plasto is to commemorate that pencil. It's just to attach it to that pencil.
Well, I think that the Nataraj 621 Plasto might say that it erases without a trace, but it has left several traces on us. Do we have anything more to add, or other than to say that just get this? This is our favorite technically hard compared to a kneaded eraser.
No, I think it's just it's a perfect mix of what a hard eraser is and what a kneaded eraser can be. And I think that's what I like about it. Maybe that makes it lower quality technically because it's kind of a soft rubber. But considering the low cost of it, you can go through them as quickly as you want and not really care. And it's extremely effective.
I'll let you in on a secret. We did not buy this to erase things with. Samir is a paper artist. You can find him on papernautic.com. We bought these to be weights inside.
So I was doing a workshop for creating automatons, which we'll put a video up, a picture or a video when we're sharing this. And when making automatons out of cardboard, a lot of the mechanism needs a certain amount of weight to pull things back down as you wind things around.
You need to counterbalance things. You need to.
And we actually initially thought that erasers are kind of a cheap weight that we can buy, and they're easy to cut and shape.
And they're a unique. They're a brick size, so they're not too unwieldy like rocks.
So initially we got a box of these to give away as weights when I was doing this workshop. We never did give away any of these Nataraj erasers as weights.
We started using them and we loved them. And why, as much as I'm for a cheap object that you can just use, I think a cheap object that you can use for its intended purpose is the best object of all. So we love this. We love the work we've done with it. Minjal, do you have anything to add?
No, I just read recently that there are electric erasers as well. Have you all used?
I have used an electric eraser. I've used a pretty low power one. I think it was just a cheap dollar store buy from Daiso, which is a Japanese chain like Muji. Yes, you can get that kind of thing, but the problem with those is they're a rotary motion.
Okay.
So you have something like that, something like at the end of this. It's basically the same kind of eraser shape.
Okay.
And it fits into a mechanized thing, and it rotates.
Okay.
I think it's kind of like the difference between a technical pen and a flexible nib fountain pen.
Yeah, you get a certain degree of play with this. That you have to be very careful. It's like any kind of beveling work or embossing work. You need to be really. You can't just drag it along nicely and get an organic line. You get sometimes very...
And also, I guess if you press even slightly too hard on it, you just have this...
Yeah, it just obliterates the paper sometimes if it's too powerful. Or if the battery is too low, then it doesn't actually do anything. It just stops. It's...
So then we stick to these.
No, I think you should get a mechanical eraser and enjoy them.
They're a special use case, I think.
But I think that, considering I have to find batteries for that, AAA batteries, and then get those special eraser heads, I think you can go a long way with one of these. That's the thing we like to show in Stationery Test Drive, that you can, whether it's a humble tool or a specialized tool or a expensive one, you can use it to its fullest.
I think the one thing, as Vishal is saying, and to add to that, the one thing we are trying to promote and communicate through a lot of these is that you can get 90 or 99% there with almost any sort of artistic work with the most basic thing. Once you get there, sure, you might want the mechanical eraser, you might want, but that's like the last 1%.
we
You can still do almost everything with this.
Yeah, we fully endorse and will show you our favorite tools that are in many ways much more expensive than the basic stuff. Like upcoming, we're going to talk about my favorite mechanical pencil, which is not a cheap pencil by any means. It's not the most expensive one either, but it's my favorite, and we'll talk about that in a future episode. Uh, but today, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it for now. Follow us on YouTube and also go to our website, inkymemo.com. Please sign up for our newsletter there, where we go into a lot more stories about the history of things like erasers and pencils and all sorts of other instruments. Vishal,
Well, until then, I've been Vishal.
Minjal.
I'm Samir.
And keep rubbing.